What's up, lords and ladies? Welcome back to another video on this channel. So in today's video, we're gonna talk about how to buy a bearded dragon from a pet shop. As you can see, I got my boy Wilbert here. Now, I never purchased him from a pet shop. I actually got him from a breeder, but I've been getting a lot of messages lately. So that means there's maybe a lot of new keepers coming into the hobby who either purchase a bearded dragon or want to purchase a bearded dragon and are looking for places where they could buy. So the very first place would be a pet shop, because that's probably the very first place where you saw it. Most breeders, you know, unless you follow them on Facebook, you probably won't even know that they exist. But with that being said, I really wanted to touch upon this topic as I'm getting a lot of messages, on Instagram regarding, bearded dragons not eating, as well as bearded dragons, being sick and they just purchased it. This whole entire video is meant to help you guys out there, pinpoint how to purchase a bearded dragon from a pet shop if that's the bearded dragon that you actually want to buy. Because, let's face it, sometimes you go to a pet shop and you just fall in love with a bearded dragon and that's the one you want to buy. But there's certain things that you have to look for before purchasing that bearded dragon. So enough of me talking, let's just get started with this video. Let's go. But before we go, I know that you guys have been missing the zoom ins. I don't know, it's probably been a month since I've done a zoom in. Man, I don't even know if this is a thing anymore, but we gotta zoom in. Whoo, baby. Look at Wilbert. He's looking all fine. He's just chillaxing on my shoulder. But hopefully you guys are all staying safe. Thank you everyone who's reached out regarding BB. She's doing a lot better, but she is still in need of some help. So I am gonna do a future video on that. But like I said, enough of me talking. Let's just get on with this video. Let's go. So you want to purchase a bearded dragon. Now, most of you might already have a bearded dragon, so this might just be some refreshers or some, nothing new. But there's a lot of you who have been wanting to purchase a bearded dragon, or who are going to purchase a bearded dragon, or who have already purchased a bearded dragon and you're having some issues. So the very first thing that I look for when it comes to purchasing a bearded dragon from anywhere is how clean the environment is. So when I'm going either to a pet shop, which I rarely buy reptiles from a pet shop, majority of the times I buy my reptiles from a breeder. But even when I'm going to reptile expos or I'm going to maybe a breeder's place, I'm checking out that they are clean. Good thing for me, I have really good friends that breed reptiles, that they are very clean and take precautions when it comes to their bearded dragon's cleanliness. But some pet shops, they are just dirty. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the bearded dragon is no good or it's broken, but that basically means that, maybe they're not taking that extra step to make sure that their bearded dragons are okay. Because if the bearded dragon's enclosure is just filthy, just imagine what the diet looks like. Just imagine what everything else looks like. That is, the very first impression should be, wow, like this place actually looks really nice. The enclosures are clean. The bearded dragons look well fed. They look nice and healthy. So if you are going with that mentality of, I want to buy a bearded dragon, I want it now, I really want it, you might overlook these things and you actually might purchase a bearded dragon that is actually sick. And then when you go look back, you're like, wow, like look at the conditions the bearded dragon was in. No wonder it was sick. So you want to make sure that, the whole entire overall, they're taking good care of their animals. If you are looking into maybe rescuing it because you feel bad, that's all on you. But as a first time keeper, I would, not recommend going and taking that, responsibility. Maybe, you might tell the owner, hey, look, I know bearded dragons should not be kept like this. Maybe offer to help clean. There's certain things, it breaks my heart when I see bearded dragons not being taken care of well, or other reptiles not being taken care of well, especially from a pet shop or a store that sells animals, because at the end of the day, they are basically in the front line. They're what everyone sees and uses them as an example. So if they're not taking care of their animals, You know, most people might think it's okay for the enclosure to be dirty or somewhat dirty, but it should be clean. And I'm not saying it should be spotless, because let's face it, you know, reptiles, they love to mess up things right after you clean it. But if you go there multiple times and nothing has changed, then there's a good sign that, you know, that place might not be the greatest place to purchase your reptiles. Now, the second thing would be check for mites. Now, for most reptile keepers, we might already know what, you know, mites are. If you've never experienced having mites in your collection, then you're lucky. Lucky for me, you know, I've been owning reptiles forever and I've not experienced it, that you know, having mites. But I do know a few people that, you know, it is just, you know, I hear the stories and I'm like, I do not ever want to experience that. But when it comes to mites, it's basically like lice for reptiles, or like fleas, you know, like how dogs and, you know, cats might have fleas. It's the same thing. When it comes to reptiles, they could get mites, and what it is, it's basically these little tiny like bugs that would, you know, be inside of their scales and basically start sucking the blood of your reptile, of your bearded dragon, and you do not want that in your collection. Trust me, you know, there's probably more harm than good of having, you know, lice or mites in your collection. So the first thing that you want to do when maybe inspecting a bearded dragon is check to see if there's any little tiny bugs moving. Sometimes they're hard to spot, but you should be able to see no black, you know, little tiny bugs on their necks, you know, especially on their neck area. But sometimes you might even see it inside of their enclosure. If they have a white piece of paper towel, you might see it walking around. Sometimes a bearded dragon or a reptile like a snake might be in the water soaking to try to take off the mites and basically drown it. So if you see a bearded dragon in the water for way too long, there might be that chance that there's mites. Now, you could, you know, take it off, but the last thing you want to do is, if you have other reptiles, bring in another reptile that has mites or you suspect has mites, and you basically spread it amongst your collection. As well as, if you are going in there and you realize there is mites, immediately tell, you know, the owner, hey, look, I noticed this, you know, what can you do about it? And then if you do have reptiles, make sure you know, try to clean it off your clothes before you enter your reptile room, because you could also carry it and then it starts spreading it by you just having it on your clothes. So one thing I always say is, you know, check for mites, make sure that the bearded dragon is healthy. You know, mites, it's not the end of the world, but at the same time, I don't think you want to deal with, you know, your first bearded dragon having mites, and having, you know, to deal with removing it, especially if it spreads all over your collection. Like, imagine me giving every single reptile that I have a bath. Like, that would be like, I mean, it won't be the end of the world, but I have to remove everything from the enclosure, disinfect it, you know, make sure I'm spraying everything outside of the enclosure. It's just a headache. And it could be simply avoided by basically avoiding places that are dirty and places that you suspect have mites. Number 3, check for runny poop. Now, this is probably the best thing that you could look for when you're looking for a bearded dragon, is, you know, going inside of the enclosure and seeing poop. You know, as gross as that might be, you know, if you're able to see how your bearded dragon is basically digesting its food, then you could more or less, you know, guess and say, hey, this bearded dragon is healthy. If you go and the bearded dragon enclosure is just covered, or there's areas where there's runny poop, there's a good indication that that bearded dragon might have parasites or a bacteria, or have trouble digesting food, especially if it's a hatchling or even an adult. If it has runny poop, you know, there's a good chance that that bearded dragon is not, you know, the healthiest bearded dragon. You know, there's certain things that you could do to prevent, you know, your bearded dragon not having running poop, as well as there's medication that you could give that would help, you know, a bearded dragon recover from that. But if this is your first rodeo, if this is your first time ever getting a bearded dragon, the last thing you want to do is get a bearded dragon that is sick and you have to go through that process of helping it recover. Because, you know, I've seen things turn a lot worse when it comes to keeping a bearded dragon that is sick for first time keepers, because there's vet bills, there's certain ways that you have to give the medication. So if you notice runny poop. Like I said, there's other, reasons that might cause a bearded dragon to have a runny stool, but majority of the times it's either a parasite or bacteria. But it could also be what food it's eating, as well as what veggies, it might have ate that day that caused runny stool. So it's not the end of the world if you do see, or if your bearded dragon starts developing runny stool, but it could lead on to being a parasite that bearded dragon has. Majority of the times, bearded dragons would not show their illness and not show their sickness until it's too late. So if you are purchasing a bearded dragon, you kind of want to look for, a nice a nice chunky solid piece of poop, I guess, that it's healthy. If you see any discoloration, maybe stay away from it. So you want to make sure that the bearded dragon that you're purchasing is going to be healthy, and checking the stool is a good example of a bearded dragon's health. Now, the next thing would be the size of the bearded dragon. So I always like recommending bearded dragons that are a couple months old, as well as maybe a yearling, even adults, because they are well established. When it comes to hatchlings, if this is your first time ever keeping a bearded dragon, you might run certain problems, and they could easily quickly get ill because they're so fragile, and you also can't hold them as much because they're so skittish. So if you are looking into getting a bearded dragon, maybe getting a bearded dragon that's well established. A couple months old is perfect, because now you know that the bearded dragon is either eating, the bearded dragon is maybe nicely tamed. The last thing you want to do is get a bearded dragon, I guess, that turns sort of like Wilbur and it's just crazy. But at the same time, each bearded dragon is different. So you might get a hatchling that is just, a complete sweetheart and never did anything. And there's nothing wrong with purchasing bearded dragons that were just born. But if you're not experienced with keeping reptiles and not keeping especially bearded dragons, they can be a little bit more challenging and a little bit more tricky, and they just eat and eat and eat. And if you're not used to that routine, your bearded dragon might suffer, as well as I've seen, breeders out there sometimes sell things, that are not the age that they are. Like, for instance, Miracle. She is, a couple months old, and if you notice, she is small, but she was born from a moldy egg. So me, as a breeder, I could easily just lie and sell her as a hatchling, but the person who purchased her is gonna have so much more trouble raising her up. So for me, I held her back and said, I'm gonna take on the responsibility, make sure I give her the best life that I possibly can, and see if she recovers from it. But even now, I don't even know if she's gonna fully be able to grow, because she's already a couple months old. Her growth is maybe stunted by now. So there's so many things that go into bearded dragons. They're living creatures. Each one is born differently. So some of them are born, to just thrive, and some of them are just born weaker than others. So you want to make sure that you get a bearded dragon that's well established, eating, as well as maybe a little bit tamed, as well as a bearded dragon of size that has, nice fat resorbs, and also, a nice thickness to it, because you don't want to get a bearded dragon that is fragile and weak, and then it dies on you, or it gets ill and then you can't help it. So it's avoiding those headaches of having your very first bearded dragon and having those bad experiences. Unfortunately, it happens. I've seen it, and I think majority of the times we get really excited. I get really excited when I'm purchasing a new reptile, and sometimes we overlook certain things that we should actually be looking. So maybe the best thing to do is take a step back. When you're in that excitement and wanting to purchase that bearded dragon or purchase that reptile, maybe take a step back, give it a week or two, and really think it through and see if you are ready for this new reptile. So hopefully these things help, but definitely if you are looking into getting a bearded dragon, they are amazing. So I highly recommend you getting one, but definitely do your research. Now, the next tip and advice I would give when it comes to purchasing a new bearded dragon is check the overall health of the bearded dragon. As you can see, Wilbur here is very active. It's early in the morning and he's still active. He's very alert. As you could see, he could hold his weight up, he could climb, he could jump. So you want to make sure that you're checking the overall health of the bearded dragon. Maybe hold it and see if it's a little bit, like wild, like this guy right here, he's just head bobbing. But you really want to make sure that the bearded dragon is healthy. That way, when you do take him home, he has a good start, because most reptiles, when you do take them home, it might take them 2 or 3 days for them to even want to eat. They might feel a little bit intimidated by the big enclosure or the new setup, so they might not eat, they might not move as much. But if a bearded dragon is nice and healthy, it's gonna immediately know what to do and start eating. If you get a bearded dragon that is sick and you take it out of that environment and put him in a stressful environment, a new environment, then chances are, it's gonna get even more sick and it's not gonna do well. So you really wanna make sure you're checking the overall health of your reptiles. Make sure you're checking for mites and all of these other things that come with the health of the bearded dragon. Sometimes even having poop in the enclosure, bearded dragons get hungry and they might even eat their own poop if you're not, if the enclosure is not clean and you haven't fed them for a good while. So if the pet shop is dirty, hasn't been feeding their bearded dragon, there's a good chance the bearded dragon might be thinking or mistaking its poop as food. I know it's gross, but them digesting that is going to get them sick. So you want to avoid certain things when it comes to checking for pet shops and checking for other places that you're purchasing your reptiles. But I highly recommend, if you are looking for a new reptile or a new bearded dragon in this case, that you talk to a local breeder. Either check them out on Instagram or Facebook. Personally, I don't breed bearded dragons as much, but from time to time I might have a clutch or two. But I'm mainly focused either on other things, other species like ball pythons, carpet pythons. I'm looking at other reptiles, like crocodile skinks, Amazon tree boas. So I do have some reptiles that I do breed, but when it comes to bearded dragons, I feel like there's so many of them already that need good homes. So if you are looking for one, definitely check out, other breeders. Or if you found that one at a pet shop that you fell in love with, it's like the perfect color, the perfect pattern, and you just want it, make sure you're taking those steps to make sure that the bearded dragon is nice and healthy and it's good for you. So hopefully this video helped. I know it's a lot of me talking, but I thought that this video would help out a lot of people, because there's so many people, I don't know if it's this quarantine or what it is, but there's so many people out there who are actually looking into getting bearded dragons, which is amazing. But I'm getting a lot more messages with people getting, their first bearded dragon and already having problems, which that shouldn't be the case. So hopefully this video helps. Maybe I make a part 2, maybe I make a part 3, maybe I don't make any more parts. But if you really enjoy these videos, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel. I'm Lord of Lion, this is Wilbur. Keep the blood pumping, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace.
You gotta hit that notification, hit that notification, hit that notification button, baby. You gotta hit that notification, hit that notification.